Follow us on Facebook at Daunta A. Long. Follow us on Instagram at Daunta Long. Follow us on YouTube at Daunta A. Long. Thank you for tuning in to Long Talk.
Good evening, good evening, good evening. And thank you so much for tuning in tonight to Long Talk. I am so happy that you've taken the time to share with us tonight on Long Talk, and I'm so appreciative that you have decided to tune in to tonight's conversation. And I count it a privilege that you have taken out of the busy schedule that you keep. And I know many of you that watch from the comfort of your own home. Many are driving, many are at work. But wherever you are, and no matter what you're doing, I am extremely thankful that you've taken the time to tune in to Long Talk tonight. I am your host, Daunta Long, and I am so thankful that you have, again, taken this time. And tonight, if you don't mind, if you will, take the moment to share, whether you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube or whatever platform you're streaming tonight's broadcast on. Please subscribe if you're on YouTube. Hit that notification bell. Also, if you're here on Facebook tonight, I want to ask you to go ahead and share this wonderful broadcast, because I believe tonight is going to be a great night for you and yours to enjoy. So please take that time to follow here on Daunta Long for Long Talk. All right. Well, listen, I know that we took last week off because it was election week, and yours truly was involved in that election process with helping and assisting, and also helping some candidates in their capacity of trying to either become elected or re-elected. And I had the wonderful privilege of assisting in one of the successful campaigns. And I pray and trust that all of you had the opportunity and took advantage, whether you did it through mail-in voting, whether you did it through early voting, as I did, or you toughed it out on election day this past Tuesday. Even though there were many reports of individuals standing in line for long periods of time, I am so happy that we did receive many reports that very few people got out of line, and many individuals did wait it out, stick it out, and decided to go ahead and cast their ballot there on election day. So you can, if you are not sure who won in the elections, please go to the Secretary of State in which you live. Whatever state you live in, you can go to that Secretary of State's website, and there should be a full outline of every election result that took place in both your state, your city, and your county. So please take the time, if you've not already done that, to do that. And I'm so happy to be back here off of the 1 week vacation, which really wasn't a vacation, but we were off the air all of last week, but we're happy to be back on tonight. So as I'm talking, please go ahead once again and share. Go ahead and share and do all that you can to let everybody know that Daunta Long and Long Talk is on the air. So please do that for me tonight, as I'm so happy many of you are watching, many of you are on Facebook, many of you are on YouTube, and that's a great joy. Well, listen, I don't want to prolong any more of your time tonight. I've got a special guest, a dear brother who pastors in the exact same city of McDonough, Georgia, that I happen to pastor in. I've had the wonderful opportunity of attending his church on several occasions, and he has treated me with such warmth and acceptance. He and his wonderful, loving congregation there at McDonough Church. And so tonight we're so privileged to have a dear brother, Pastor Jake Williams of McDonough Church. Tonight, Long Talk, help me welcome my friend and my brother, Pastor Jake Williams. God bless you, Pastor Jake.
Hey, Daunta, how are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my friend, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on and talk with us here tonight on Long Talk.
Absolutely. Hey, I just want to say real quick, I pray for you on a regular basis. I pray for seed planters on a regular basis. I absolutely love you like a brother, and it's just a privilege. So thank you so much. I love you and your church.
Thank you so very much. As I said in the opening, I've had the opportunity from the very first time I walked in off of the street and setting your service as you all gather, and I'm going to let you talk about that in a few minutes, as you all gather each week, just to watch you. First of all, you are a musician. I was. You're very similar to me. I saw you there on the drums, and then as I was looking around, I got to be honest, like, who's the pastor here? And you got up off of the drums and proceeded to the podium and began to preach. It reminded me of growing up in my father's small church in Southwest Atlanta, where I was the drummer. And on every fourth Sunday, I'd have to get up off of the drums and walk around the altar up to the pulpit. And I got to admit, I just chuckled a little bit and said, man, I'm not the only guy who has ever done that in my life. No. So,
no, we're a little biased. It's the best instrument, I think, out there. But yeah, those are the joys of a small church. You wear a lot of hats. Certainly, it's a privilege to be able to serve in both capacities. So
absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. And so just to watch you, just to watch you do what you do is just so overjoying. And then I want you just to take a few minutes and just share with our viewing audience exactly who you are and tell us a little bit about the McDonough Church.
Absolutely. My name is Jake Williams, pastor of McDonough Church, as Daunta said. McDonough Church is located right in the heart of McDonough on Jonesboro Road, and one of many, many amazing churches in Henry County, yours included in that, certainly in God's bigger church. But we're a small congregation, good people, great city to be part of. Certainly, I love McDonough, I love our city, love Atlanta. We meet on Saturday nights. It's kind of different for no religious reason, certainly. Mm-hmm. But Henry County, as you know, has over 700 churches. So we just decided to offer something a little bit different to try to pick up maybe a little bit different audience that couldn't come on Sundays for whatever reason, maybe schedule-wise they work. So we meet Saturday nights at 6 p.m. for that reason. So certainly it's a privilege and an honor. Been pastoring 12 years now and love every minute of it. What an amazing blessing to be able to do that.
Absolutely. And so what led you to McDonough, Georgia, if I may ask?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Morrow, and then my dad was a minister. My dad was a pastor 17 years, and started flying for Delta, was a Delta pilot for 7 years, and kind of a weird route to pastoring. And one day I lost my job. I got hurt and had 15 surgeries to reconstruct my knee. And during that time, during surgeries and over a 4-year period, God called me into ministry. And I was reluctant at first. I'd watched my dad go through that. And like you mentioned your dad pastoring, and I told God no. I told God I'm not doing that. And I have a career picked out, and I'm doing my career. And God had a little bit different plan for my life. So there was about a year of wrestling with God. And I finally submitted to God and said, okay, this is your life. I'm yours. Take me wherever you want. So growing up in Morrow, I was working in Cincinnati, and God brought us back here to plant a church 12 years ago. So that ultimately led to McDonough Church.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow. Well, that is such a joy to watch you just continue to do what you do on Saturday nights. When I have had the opportunity to come by and worship with you guys. Again, a great congregation. Just to watch you all be such a compassionate group about the mission and the purpose of Jesus Christ, and to see how you all serve the community. And that's one of the reasons why I want to bring you on tonight, just to talk about many of the things that you've done to serve the city of McDonough. If you will, just highlight maybe a couple of things that you all have done here recently.
Certainly. Like your church, you and I have talked about this. I think that we don't attend church, we are the church. I think that's important. There's a differentiation between the fact that church isn't a building, church is a group of people. So keeping that in mind, we've always tried to be mission-minded and be the church in our community. Certainly partnering with a number of different causes. We worked with the Pregnancy Resource Center in Henry County. We worked with a number of missions up in Atlanta, providing aid for homeless. We worked with a ministry called Soul Hope, which makes shoes for folks in Uganda that don't have something for their feet. And they get disease in their feet. And it's a very simple mission with an incredible purpose, just making shoes here and then shipping them over to Uganda. So our church has been in a number of had a number of opportunities like that over the years, and we've partnered with every one of those. Certainly in COVID, in the last, 8 or 9 weeks now, life has looked different. So we've tried to serve just our community, serve neighbors. And since we weren't able to meet in person, it was a great opportunity for us to be reminded that the church is a group of people and be out in our community and not locked up in a building, get outside of our four walls. So we've encouraged the congregation to serve in any capacity, work with any need that they see. So, yep.
Great. Well, so glad that you have been able to continue to serve in the city of McDonough and do all that you do for the community and for the world at large. And Pastor Jake, I really wanted to bring you on because I have just been so inundated, as all of us have been, and I thought it would be a good gesture to bring you on tonight, just to address what's been going on in our climate and in our world. Nearly 2 weeks ago, there was a most unfortunate killing of Mr. George Floyd in the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, which took place on the evening of Memorial Day. And because of that tragic event, we have seen so many protests. We've seen significant outcry, and we have seen just a continued day after day manifestation of uprising, if you will, a manifestation of uprising. And that's why I wanted to come on tonight and to ask you just a few questions, because I just thought it to be just necessary that I hear you and hear what it is that I believe God is saying in this hour through both of us. And to hear what God is saying through both of us, to me, would be so significant. And for us to be able to give clear direction to so many that will watch us. And I wanted to take this time and just ask you a few questions that have been burning upon not only my heart, but the hearts of so many. And just to really have real dialogue tonight, so that we can truly understand where we are and where we are to go in the days to come. All right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I just want to ask you this. One of the things that was burning on my heart was, do you believe that the 4 policemen were as detrimental to the killing of Mr. George Floyd as was the officer who placed his knee upon the neck of Mr. George Floyd?
Look, I don't think anybody could watch those 8 minutes of video and not have compassion or be moved to tears for what happened with George Floyd. I think what happened in his case was it was horrific. It was just barbaric. And I don't think anybody in our country or across the world could watch could watch that and not sit there and hear somebody gasping for air, somebody begging for their life, somebody pleading for mercy or humane treatment, and not respond as a believer or unbeliever, either way, with just a heart of brokenness for what happened. I think that certainly there is no excusing that behavior. I think that the problem with it is what happened. That's a problem. I think the reaction is also a problem. I think it goes back to just, in essence, I'll speak from a pastor standpoint. I'm not a politician. I'm certainly not a sociologist or anybody that studies society. But from a pastor standpoint, both are wrong, I think. And when you look at a lot of the reaction, it's uncalled for. Some of that, I guess, I'm talking about is it's very easy to judge those officers. I don't know certainly what their intention was. I don't know what they had running through their head. Both the officer with his knee on the back of his neck and then the other 4 officers on looking. Certainly can only imagine. I could probably speculate, but I don't know. As a believer, though, we're called, in my opinion, not to judge. I think the Bible's pretty clear about that. Certainly they will have their day in court as they've been arrested. I hope they get a fair trial. I hope that they're innocent until proven guilty, if that is what it comes to, certainly. But I hope for the sense of fairness. I guess my issue with the reaction is it's easy to judge others by their actions, and it's easy to judge ourselves by our intentions. And I think that it's very clear. Obviously, you can see their actions. The whole world saw that. The problem is that what you're watching now is that we're actually uniting over brokenness. We're uniting over hurt. We're uniting over anger. We're uniting over hatred. And I'm not talking about any certain race or side. I'm talking about just what you're watching as cities burned, people killed, businesses destroyed, houses burned, police stations burned. And all of that is united over hatred. And I think anytime people unite over hatred, Satan's won. Proverbs says it's to a man's wisdom gives his patience, is to his glory to overlook an offense. Mm-hmm. Certainly what we could all agree on is George Floyd's death was an offense. I would love to see people unite over love and grace and mercy and kindness instead of uniting over hatred from either side. And hurt and bitterness and anger. Certainly think there's a place for speaking your mind and protesting in our country. I don't think there's a place for rioting and killing people and abusing other people because we're angry. I think that's the wrong thing to unite over.
Sure. Particularly my focus tonight was their silence is what a lot of attention has not been given to. And I wanted to just ask you, not knowing what was running through their head, do you believe that one of them should have intervened? One of them should have cried out or said enough is enough, or one of them could have said, hey, stop, or given some type of action that could have perhaps prevented this tragic event from happening?
Yes. I think when you see injustice, you should speak up. When you see something that's going wrong, you should speak up. Certainly those officers had, I presume, a lot of training between the 5 of them total. And I think that any one of them should have spoken up and done the right thing. Just because somebody else is doing the wrong thing doesn't make it okay. You can always have character integrity.
Now, I do want to say this. One report came out that two of those officers were new on the job, per se. Do you think that's a excuse, or that is a proper cause? Because we've heard a lot of people say that rookies do not challenge veterans, and so if they had only been on the job for, I think one report said 3 days or 2 days or something like that, that perhaps they did not have enough fortitude to say, hey man, stop, hey, you're cutting off his air supply, or hey, maybe even physically restrain him, perhaps?
Certainly. I don't know what was running through their head. That's a great question. I can tell you that certainly I would hope that if you're given a badge and a gun and the privilege of serving in that capacity, that you'd be well trained. I would hope. I think overall police officers, from what I've seen, are pretty well trained. That doesn't excuse their behavior, and certainly in every job, there's people that stink at their job, regardless of what profession it is. So whether they were good at their job, I don't know. Whether they used good judgment, certainly it does not appear that they did. Whether they were silent due to rank, I don't know. I guess that will probably come out in court, and somebody will have to figure that out.
And I'm struggling with that silence. That's what's been eating at my core, Brother Jake, because I'm trying to figure out with any sense of humanity, whether I'm day one on the job, minute one on the job, hour one on the job, day one on the job, second day, second hour, and but the humanity within me, if I were to see, we get into this thing about any type of violence that takes place, if we see somebody being harmed, I hate to swing the pendulum this way, but the old adage is, if I see a kid or a woman in a house that's burning, whether I am a trained fireman or not, would I go in to try to save the child or save the woman? And I err on the side of 10 times out of 10, I would go as far as to lose my life so that I could save the life of a woman or a child who I would see in a burning house. And I would say, how much more would a public servant, which is an officer who has way more training than I would have, would make a call and would say, we're in danger of terminating somebody's life. So the humanity piece in me, even if that house is burning and I don't see how I can make it out alive, I still believe 10 times out of 10, I would save the child, because I don't know, somewhere in my psyche, I've learned that, well, I'm 30 and 9 years old, but that child is only 7. I've lived longer than the child. That child deserves to live a long life. And maybe, I'm a father and I got kids, and somebody's going to say, well, you got kids and they need their dad. But I think, and I know I'm swinging the pendulum all the way on this one, but I'm trying to just understand this from a perspective of humanity. And to say to humanity, if I see somebody inflicting harm and pain, and I, as a public servant, do nothing to try to prohibit or stop, has something gone ultimately wrong?
Yes, but what you're seeing, I think, isn't a police issue. It's a breakdown in society. How many accidents have we all driven by, where you see somebody on the side of the road and literally you watch stream after stream? Now I pull over, but you literally see dozens of cars drive by an accident. And I mean, I've sat on the side of the road with car issues before. I've sat there for hours. It felt like waiting for the tow truck to arrive, and not one person pulled over to say, can I help? I think you're seeing a breakdown in society. You're seeing kids bullied in school. You're watching kids watch that. And again, it's probably a bad example that breaks down somewhere, but certainly it's a degradation in society, in that we all see tragedies. We all see injustices. And often we don't speak up. We should. We tell our kids to. But when it comes down to it, I think we've all driven by an accident, watched something happen, and not done what we ought to. Now, it feels like it's a more egregious offense by a public servant for some reason. I don't know why that is.
Let me ask you this. Is it because they've taken an oath to protect the community?
I would suspect so, yeah.
Yeah. It is ironic. I'll give you another example. Just today, as I was with my wife and we were going to pick up our kids, there was an ice cream truck out in this particular neighborhood, and the ice cream man was leaned over the truck, as they customarily and historically have done, passing the ice cream two young girls. This was a male. He was passing it to two young girls, but I saw a car right in front of it, almost serving as surveillance because those two children, their guardian, their mother, their father, older brother, sister, nobody was present. And that individual who was in that car, I don't know if they were of relation or of non-relation. My suspicion is they weren't, because immediately once they got the ice cream and the ice cream van rolled on, that car sped off. And I'm saying today, which made this question I continue to raise more, the reason why it kept eating more at my heart, and when I use the word eating, I mean literally tearing away the fiber of my heart, is if again, swinging the pendulum to a fire today with an ice cream truck, if many people will take the responsibility, how much more if they have taken the responsibility of public service, not to mention being incentivized by my tax dollars and your tax dollars, right?
Sure, absolutely.
And I think that this is why so many people are upset, disappointed, angry.
Yes.
Or perhaps even displaying hatred, which you and I both do not condone. We do not believe that we shall desecrate anybody's property, business, anything of that sort. And so, no, I do not support that type of behavior. But to be out and to be vocal about it, do we have a right if we feel like the public service has let us down or has not fulfilled their duty, particularly in this case with those 4 police officers that seemingly, and I hate to use the word seemingly because we watched, but they did absolutely nothing to intervene?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's easy to lump 4 officers in with everybody, correct? And with actions don't necessarily define everybody's actions. 2 things can be true at one time. Yeah. You can have folks that certainly did not do a great job. You can have officers that don't do a great job all across our country. But that certainly doesn't define the other, 99%, whatever percent of officers that do a good job, that work their tails off, that put their life on the line to protect freedom, to protect the oppressed. Certainly, I mean, how many times have I called 911 for an emergency and somebody came and did a great job? And I'm grateful every time that they showed up, put their life on the line. We were broken into a number of years ago, and somebody was at our front door, and guys showed up, guns blazing, and I was grateful. I got to hide locked in my house while somebody else was putting their life on the line. So certainly, I understand these officers may not have done the right thing, but I'm not sure that defines all of the officers that are doing the right thing, and that's the part that's
I don't think anybody's going to demonize the entire police department.
No.
And I think a misnomer is out that when the reports are, to defund police, they're just saying, if we're going to pay all this money for extra artillery, extra regalia of protection, extra money for, transportation, extra money for training. Let's just say if we spend an extra X amount of dollars to train officers, and if this is the result that we saw, then should we continue to spend money to train officers if in this critical moment officers did not handle this situation in the right way?
I don't know. That's a debate for probably somebody much smarter than I, with a higher pay grade on that one. I can tell you that it's easy to look at, in situations like this, I think it's easy to look at the problem. It's easy to look at what's bad and what has gone wrong here. I think that in doing that may be a bit short-sighted, and we've neglected what's gone well. And I certainly think it's very easy to say this was an atrocity. There must be some bigger issue. What if this is a more isolated atrocity? What if more good happens than bad? What if more right happens than wrong? I certainly am not saying not to put the spotlight on the wrong. I think the wrong needs to be fixed. And in this case, it was atrocious. Again, there's no excusing it. But I think it may be short-sighted to say that it's more wrong than right. I certainly think that police, public servants do more right on any given day than the wrong. And in their case, I think that Minneapolis certainly had a lot of great instances that day, a lot of great calls that day. One guy got killed, George Floyd, and again, there's no excusing that. I'm not justifying that, and his life matters, absolutely matters, and that needs to be dealt with. That doesn't account for the other thousands of calls that did not end this way, that likely happened that Memorial Day, where officers responded in the correct fashion. Thousands of them.
Sure. But I do believe the concentration and the reason why society is placing a great focus is because, unfortunately, this is not an isolated event, right? You travel back 5 years prior into the same city of Minneapolis when another unarmed black male with a black female were in a car, and that male, whose name was Philandro Castile, was gunned down by a police officer. On that day, I'm sure the police responded adequately to several hundred, if not thousand, calls properly. But
Sure.
On that day, and so the city was saying, this is strike two. The country is saying, this is strike off the charts. And you go down this list of unarmed individuals that have been killed by police officers. And I believe this is why the country is up in arms, or there is unrest present. And so, can you see why perhaps there is so much unrest if now people are saying this is strike number 2 for Minneapolis, but this is strike 300 or strike 400 for our country?
I can, but I'm going to say something that may be a bit unpopular. I don't know as if what happened in Minneapolis was a race issue. Nothing that I have seen has led that, and this will be determined, I'm sure, in court. Did that officer put his knee in the back of George Floyd's neck because George Floyd was black and the officer was white? Or did he do that because he was not good at his job and made a grave mistake that day? I've not heard anything to the contrary that said he did that. He saw an African American and decided, I'm going to kill him because I don't like African Americans. I think that that's a gross overstatement. And I've not seen anything that points in George Floyd's case, and I'll just talk specifically to that, because, I mean, we could take case after case after case. I think everyone's different. But I don't think in this case that I've seen nothing that points towards race. Now, the reaction has been all about race. The reaction has been all about somehow there's some sort of greater, more sinister thing going on beneath the surface. And again, two things can be true at one time. There are certainly examples of racism in this country. There are certainly racist police officers. There are certainly racist people. In this instance, though, was this an act of racism? I don't know if we have that answer yet. I'm waiting for the facts to come out. I think there's a lot more facts that do need to come out, but I'm not sure that's been answered.
In your mind, what would be some of the clear indicators that race was involved?
If you're going to make such a defaming statement that somebody killed somebody else based on the color of their skin, then I think it better be very, very clear that that was the motivating factor behind it. You say, what would be an indicator?
Yeah.
You'd have to have some sort of omission of that, some sort of indisputable fact. If you're going to, I mean, that's a strong statement to say that he killed him because he was black and the other guy was white. That's a very strong statement. That's horrible. That's egregious. It would have to be something stronger than just, I feel like because one was one color and one was the other, that's why he did it. Because I'll be honest with you, I think it's racist to blame a white cop for killing a black man until the facts come out, I think it's race. The reverse is racist. To say, well, because he was white, he must have killed him because he was black. Well, that's an assumption of that officer simply based on the color of his skin. That's saying we have a white cop, he must be racist. Well, in itself, isn't that a racist assumption? I think that's a race. I think that in itself would be very judgmental to say he must have killed the black guy because he was white. Well, I don't know that. I don't want to assume that. And I don't want to ever assume wrong of somebody or motive of somebody simply based on the color of their skin. I don't think that's correct, and I think that would be a horrible conclusion to land on.
So other than an individual confessing that orally, there are no other mitigating factors that could determine that?
I think there's several. You could see past performance. You could say, actually, no, because I think people, I think people set aside their differences all the time. I've had this happen at church. I've had people disagree with me before on a theological point, and they did not act. They didn't come to the stage and strangle me during my sermon. I'm grateful for that. That said, though, just because they disagreed with me, they did not take it out on me as a minister. I think you can have some sort of poor thought. And again, I attribute racism more to action than I do thought. I think that thoughts, as a believer, we're held to a higher standard. We are called to make sure our thoughts are godly and pure and aligned with Christ, right? That said, though, you're going to have to show me some sort of proof in the case of this police officer that his actions were racist. It can't just be, well, I feel like it is, because I don't think that's enough. I don't think that holds weight in court. I certainly don't think that that's fair on him as well.
Okay. Well, there has been a witness and two witnesses that have confirmed that both George Floyd and the officer who placed his knee had a prior history.
They did. I heard
aware
that.
of that?
Yeah.
And it is alleged that they, and I don't think we have any way to confirm this now because
Sure.
Mr. Floyd is deceased, that they had several interactions or run-ins,
Mm-hmm.
and because this was a prior history, then perhaps this was in the mindset of the arresting officer when he did so, because I don't know if we can ever determine that this was an appropriate way to arrest somebody who was unarmed, or this was an appropriate way to detain somebody who was not resisting.
But that's not necessarily a race issue in my mind. That's a poor police issue. That goes back to training. It goes back to decision making. It goes back to stupidity, whatever you want to call it, right? But that none of that seems to point towards color in my mind, unless there's some sort of factual basis. And again, I don't want to assume anything of this guy. I don't want to assume anything of anybody simply based on the color of their skin. Unless there's some sort of factual basis that says that he acted out of racism, I don't want to assume that. I can draw conclusions. I can guess. But I don't want to. I don't want to judge somebody based solely on the fact that one guy was white, one guy was black. So let's think the worst of either one of them. Let's not do that. Let's not judge.
Yeah. Or we could say 4 guys were non-minorities. 1 guy was minority.
Sure.
And so we have 4 individuals, rather 5 individuals, and 1 minority. I think that's why individuals have a higher level of comfort. And again, this pattern that we saw 5 years prior with 2 non-minority officers, 1 minority. And
Yep.
then again, what America says, but we've seen this continued pattern of when it is a black male that's being arrested,
Sure.
extra egregious force is being used in opposed to when Caucasian males or Caucasian women. That it seems to be a pattern with an abundance of repetitious instances where at the least they're using unnecessary force or overly egregious force. But I guess where I really wanted to where I want to focus again, the silence is what's troubling me.
It is.
The silence to say nothing. Not to act as a humanitarian, not to act as a public servant, not to intervene for the common good of life. And so many times I have asked myself, given the instance, how is it that if every ordinary day people like you and I and others will go out of our way to help in some way, but somebody who has taken a sworn oath remains so silent? That's what's troubling. And also not only speaking to that silence, but in that silence, the next question that I wanted to ask you was, do you believe that the church at large has been silent about this issue? Has the church addressed this adequately?
I think to deny the effects of history is idiotic. To deny that racism doesn't exist would be foolish. However, to attribute racism to the issues in the world, I think would be very short-sighted, or all the issues in the world, I should say. To talk about the church, I think anytime we take our eyes off of Jesus and we put our eyes on something else, problems ensue. In this case, what you're seeing, I think, isn't a race issue. It's a spiritual issue. I think Ephesians is pretty clear about that when it says in Ephesians chapter 6, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers and against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Meaning that it's not against people, it's a spiritual battle. And I think what you're seeing is a spiritual problem in America. It's a godlessness in America. Our nation has continued to move away from Christ. A good example of this, I saw a recent study talking about atheism that said almost 30% of kids under the age of 30 are now atheists. That's a horrible statistic. That's certainly an about face from what our country was founded on and where we're going. I guess I'm not surprised on a lot of the reactions in our country. I think it's sad, but I'm not surprised. Because I think a lot of that's crept in, to answer your question, a lot of that's crept into the church. When it's difficult to tell believers from unbelievers, when it's difficult to tell, I heard a term one time called practical atheism, meaning that somebody's actions are not that much different from somebody else's actions that's not a believer. It's very difficult to tell Christians anymore. And I'm not disparaging the church. I'm not disparaging Christians. I'm simply saying that Christians don't stand out like they used to, or don't stand out like they should. Do I believe that the church has adequately addressed the issue and the crisis? No, because I don't think the church is being the church. I think that the church, again, has continued to take their eyes off Jesus and put it on things that don't matter. Satan's job is to steal, kill, and destroy. And I think Satan often does that by distracting. And I think that what you're seeing is Satan is distracting people for what matters and causing people to put their eyes on what doesn't matter. And in this case, I think that Satan is distracting people away from the state of somebody's soul and causing us to put our eyes on things that are anything but that. And it's sad to watch.
And so I'm seeing a correlation between the officer's behavior and the mainline evangelical church.
Yes.
Particularly the white evangelical church. And I've been somewhat disappointed because I felt as though individuals have addressed it and what I mean by addressing it, saying that it was unfortunate, it was horrific, it was unfortunate, and I've heard this language used by so many pastors. Unfortunate, horrific, terrible, all of these adjectives that speak to the heinousness, but nobody actually saying that these actions were wrong.
I think sin is sin. Let's call it sin. Sin is sin is sin. It doesn't. Sin's ugly. Any way you dice it, sin is ugly. There's not a worse sin, better sin. Sin is disgusting in the eyes of God, and abhorrent in the eyes of God. I think what we're seeing though is a nation, a church, a people that's taking their eyes off of Christ. And again, it's a race to the bottom when that happens, right? Anything is possible. You're watching a nation that doesn't value life in the form of abortion. You're watching a nation that doesn't value life on the back end of life, and is now. You see some states who are proponents of basically assisted suicide at the back end of life. You're watching a systemic breakdown of society, of morals, of godlessness is rampant. You're watching just a breakdown in society, period. You're pulling God out of schools. You're pulling God out of, we've got churches now that don't even mention the word sin. I'm not judging churches. I'm not going to say any names. I'm saying that we've got churches that are no longer preaching the gospel and are doing everything they can simply to put numbers and butts in the seats and draw a crowd for the sake of whatever reason. That's not church. That's not the gospel. And anytime you remove Christ from something, again, we shouldn't be surprised at the outcome. Where Jesus came to this earth not because it was and walked on this earth and it was different. Shouldn't Christians be different? And in the case of George Floyd, in the case of the breakdown in society, you say, I don't want government to step in, to be honest with you. That was never the biblical model. The biblical model was always that the church stepped in, that the church was salt, that the church was light, that the church made a difference, that Christians lived boldly and dangerously, and Christians put their life on the line to be different and to bring hope to their communities, right?
Right.
The answer isn't that the government steps in and the government's stronger and the government fixes our problems. The answer is that the church becomes the church again. And I'm hoping where there's adversity, there's usually opportunity. I'm hoping that the church steps up and becomes the church again, stands up for what's right, goes against what is wrong, and lives dangerously. The church has fallen asleep. And I'm hoping that some of this adversity brings and wakes the church back up.
So that we can take a model to call sin, sin, or to
Yes.
call wrongdoing, wrongdoing.
Yes.
All right. Listen, Pastor Jake, got to take a quick break, but we'll be right back in about 1 minute, okay?
Sure.
All right.
Follow us on Facebook at Daunta A. Long. Follow us on Instagram at Daunta Long. Follow us on YouTube at Daunta A. Long. Thank you for tuning in to Long Talk.
God bless you, and thank you so much for joining us. We're back here on Long Talk, and so thankful for the opportunity for everyone that is watching. We're so appreciative for you to take the time to tune in and be a part of what we're doing here at Long Talk. And again, just happy tonight to have our special guest, Pastor Jake Williams, Senior Pastor of McDonough Church, who's our special guest tonight, as we're just talking about before the front end of the break, that it's time for the church to address wrongdoing, to call that which is wrong, wrong, and to no longer be silent. Pastor Jake, I'll ask you again, the silence factor of not only just those officers, but the church. Do you think because of our silence, this is why we've seen such a turning away, that statistic that you brought up earlier, that 39, nearly 40% of today's culture do not believe in God, do not believe in the finished works of Jesus Christ on the cross, and could care less about our message and have turned away from our message?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I heard an interesting interview with a guy named Ezra Klein. Ezra Klein is the founder of a website called Vox. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Vox does a number of news pieces. One of the things in that interview he said was interesting. He said, currently 8 out of 10 people who are religious are over the age of 60. And one of the things that Ezra Klein said that was interesting is he's pretty much a non-religious guy, and probably has very different beliefs than you or I would have in many regards. But one of the things he said was he's excited to see the shift. And by shift, he then said that as compared to the 8 out of 10 people over 60 that are religious, he said 2 out of 10 under the age of 30 are religious. 8 out of 10 under the age of 30 are not. And his point was, he went on to say, he said, I will be very interested. He said, I'm excited. He actually used the word excited. He said, I'm excited to see the shift that happens in our society in a number of years when we see the dying off of the older generation and the younger generation takes the reins. He said, and by younger, I mean the non-religious generation. He said, I would love to see atheism at the same number of Christianity or even larger. He said, just think of the cultural shift. And he was excited about this fact. He said, just think of the cultural shift that can happen. He said, when we have a non-religious, atheistic society be the majority. And he said, just think of all the good that we can do in the world. He said, by way of fairness and abortion. He said, finally, women will have rights. And he went on and he spelled out a number of things that I would strongly object to. And he said, just think of the shift that will happen. He said, again, when that non-religious majority takes the helm. He said, our country will then be moving in the right direction. And it broke my heart to hear that. It absolutely broke my heart. But what you're seeing is that shift now. What you're seeing is that movement now as the younger generation who is not religious, who is atheistic, who doesn't, 2 out of 10 even would say that they're religious. 8 out of 10 say they're not. That's creeping into society. That's not isolated. That's a breakdown of homes. That's a breakdown of marriages. That's a breakdown of church not being the church. We're not reaching the younger generation. We're not at all. In fact, 80 cents on every dollar in the Baptist Association comes from someone over 60. You can see that will be a problem in about 30 years when that generation starts to pass. You're going to have a defunding in church. You're going to have a defunding. I mean, you've got a breakdown. And this godlessness is creeping into every aspect of society, and we're watching it happen beneath our eyes. And the church is being very ineffective as a whole in reaching that younger generation. It's not enough to put a podcast online anymore and hope that somebody happens to click on it. Although that's great, and I hope that they do. It's time that it goes back to where we started, where we said that the church isn't a building. It's not 4 walls. It's a group of people. The church, it's a great thing that people go to church, but that was never the Great Commission. The Great Commission was that the church goes to the world. And I so hope that in the coming years, those statistics are reversed and that our church starts to realize that there's a greater problem happening beneath our eyes. And we're doing nothing effectively to counter that. Nothing at all. We don't know how to reach that generation.
Jake, the parallel for me is the fear factor.
Yes.
Whether, and I'm going to keep bringing these two pieces together, the officer's silence and the church's silence.
Yes.
Number one, as you said, to call wrong is wrong. But before we even call wrong is wrong, a fear that this may jeopardize who we are. And like I said, I've seen so many preachers say that what has happened is horrific, unfortunate, but they've not called it wrong. And do you think it's because they're afraid to say to their congregations that what has transpired is wrong?
I do, but I think as we saw in COVID, how many states did we have where churches are still shut down to this day? And you can meet and you can go to an assembly with 100 people, but a church can't meet. I think there's a greater fear, not just in saying wrong is wrong, but there's a greater fear right now that the church in America is under attack. And I think pastors are afraid and they're tiptoeing, and they don't know how to reach the generation, so they're trying to blend in with the generation. And that's it goes back to a boldness or a lack of. It goes back to, again, wrong is wrong, sin is sin. But how many pastors are afraid? I'll use an example. How many pastors are afraid to say homosexuality is wrong in this country based on the fact that the Bible says it's wrong? And they're fearful of that. So they tiptoe around it, or they don't preach on it, or they don't mention it. I'm not saying you hammer. Again, our second calling is to love, after loving God, is to love each other, right? So you can say wrong is wrong and you can love. The problem is how do you do that effectively in our society? How do you do that? So because pastors don't know how to do that, I think they're silent. And instead of trying, I think they just sit there idly, hoping that somehow a solution will fall into their lap. Well, they're losing the war as we speak. And like you said, those officers sat silent and watched a man die. We are sitting silent and watching an entire generation die. And I don't mean their body, I mean the soul. I mean, we're watching religion die. We're watching Christianity die.
Well, Jake, if I can comment on that, many young people have said to me, Pastor, the injustices that are happening in our society, we don't hear you preachers, and I hear that from black and whites,
Sure.
because of the positions I'm placed in. Many times, they're saying that we don't even address the injustices, and what I've been talking about in my local church for the last 2 weeks and talking about here online is Jesus' prayer in John chapter 17 that talks about make us becoming one. If the black church is standing up saying that what happened was wrong, but our counterparts are not saying it was wrong, they're classifying the scenery, classifying the scenery, speaking to the scenery, but not speaking to the issue and saying what happened was wrong. The latter part of John 17 says, then the world will not believe that I was sent. And that's why they're saying, I don't want to hear your Jesus. I don't want to be a part of your church because you may want to teach me how to get out of debt. You want to teach me how to get a new house. You want to teach me to be the best me. But I can't be the best me if I'm the next George Floyd, or if I'm the next Tamir Rice, the next Trayvon Martin. And this is what I hear from a lot of my young children. And so I say, if we're speaking on this side, and I hate to divide it, but this is what I've been seeing for the last 3 weeks. One group of African American pastors saying this is what happened. What happened was wrong, and the persons who did it were wrong for not intervening, for not stepping up, for not physically moving their fellow brother off of him. And if nobody on the other side is calling it wrong, then I don't see how the world is going to believe that God sent Jesus to the world. And I see this to be what is the disconnect.
That's fair.
How do you?
I don't hear anybody. I have not heard anybody, and maybe I need to listen more. I've not heard anybody say what happened in George Floyd's case was right.
No, they're not saying it's right.
Or any race, any church. I've in fact, everything I've heard overwhelmingly is that what happened was wrong, and needs to be addressed. Hands down, right? Wrong is wrong. I don't know. I don't know how. I think the problem's big. I don't know how to fix it. As long as we view church as a once a week thing, as long as people view themselves as attending church, check off their box, come an hour a week, 2 hours a week, whatever it is, a couple Sundays a week, and check off the box and move on, put it back out of their mind and think about it the following week. I don't think we're ever going to see an awakening in our community or change in this world. I think there's only so much a pastor can do. I think that you and I could probably preach till our hearts fall out. Unless the church adopts that message, internalizes that message, and runs with it, I'm not sure what happens at that point.
Well, Brother Jake, I think what the perspective I've taken on it, if I could take the liberty to share this, I'm actually encouraged because as we just celebrated Pentecost, those of us in the Christian church just celebrated Pentecost, we always focus in on Joel's prophecy of old. It says, in the last days, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, And that's not talking about Brother Jake. I see you with a new house. Brother Jake, I see you with a $1 million business. But in my instance, I believe prophesying in this hour is talking about speaking truth to power, calling wrong wrong. You know, the kings of the Old Testament, when they prophesied, they called wrong wrong. They told the king, what you're doing is wrong. Nathan told David, what you did to Uriah was wrong. Right?
Yep, absolutely.
And so what I'm believing is that God is raising up the young in this time to prophesy, to say to city municipalities, to county municipalities, to state agencies, to federal agencies, to world agencies. The misappropriation, the turning of a blind eye, the continued injustice against unarmed black males, the disproportionate of funding for schools in certain communities, and all of these issues that are happening. But I believe they're out speaking this now, calling for change in systems, calling for abolishment of old regimes and old paradigms. Do you see that transpiring in this time?
Tough to say. I hope so. I certainly see God raising up certainly individuals within this generation. I don't want to disparage any generation. I hope that I will just say it this way. I have faith in what is seen and unseen, and I hope that I trust that God's working behind the scenes, and certainly God loves this world and these people more than any of us can ever imagine. And I trust that God's working for the good in all things for those who are in Christ Jesus. I will say that, as you know, the healing for a land, by the way, I think is interesting, is that, and as you know, the verse, it says, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and I will heal their land. And I think that the key word there is a lot of things, but pray. But I think the other key word in that verse is humble. And that humility and prayer were the initial input into the forgive the sin and heal their land. And I think that I would love to see more humility on all ends of the spectrum in our country for a healing of our country. I think that starts with humility. I genuinely, and I believe that I see that a lot. I just think that on a larger scale, I would like to see that as well.
I like that passage in Isaiah that you just quoted, to turn from your evil ways or to turn from your sin. And sometimes we need others, as I gave the instance earlier. Every David needs a Jonathan. Every Moses needs a Jethro. Every Timothy needs a Peter.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, every Timothy needs a Paul. Forgive me.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I'm believing that the only way that many of us will turn is for the prophet, for the priest to tell us that what you're doing is wrong. I think this is an internal hour where we have to have discussions like these for us to say what you are doing is wrong. Sure. And I know that we're in a very impersonal society now, and we use inclusive language because we don't want to point out and we don't necessarily want to put anyone on the spot. But I think, again, what I'm seeing now in these protests and what I'm seeing in these demonstrations is that people, young people, and I want to keep placing that focus on young because I believe Joel's words are true in today's culture, that as the young people are prophesying, and what I mean by prophesying, again, let me be clear, is that they're speaking truth to power. They're declaring. And what young people who are Jesus followers are seeing it through the lens of the wrongdoing, knowing that there will be no force, no principality, no ruler, no person of influence that will stand in the way of the purpose of God. while the unbelievers are crying out what's wrong, I believe the believers are crying out the wrong, because it is not allowing the purpose and the plan and the mission of Christ in the earth. Yeah, we're at home praying, pray, but turn from your evil ways. Yeah, the praying part is good. I think the church has had no problem praying, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we'll pray all day. Call my mother on the phone right now. She'll break out in a prayer.
Absolutely.
A 1 hour prayer.
Yeah,
Mama,
absolutely.
I'm sorry if
absolutely.
you're watching me on YouTube, Mama. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You know how you are. She'll strike up a prayer meeting in a half a heartbeat. But again, getting my mama out there on the line to protest, she's gonna say, "No, I'm too old for that," and rightfully so she is. That's why I believe the scripture says that the sons and daughters will be out here prophesying, will be out here speaking the truth.
Sure.
And those that are followers of Jesus Christ, we speak the truth according to the word of God. We call down those principalities and those rulers in dark places, those elected officials that when it is time to vote for reform, they don't show up for the vote. They prolong the vote and table it to the next session. Jake, you know my story. Maybe you don't, but I never get tired of telling it. Never am I going to be ashamed. When it was that we were new to our community and our church was vandalized and desecrated. Not only vandalized, but why did it shift from just vandalism to desecration? Because satanic images were plastered on our walls.
Absolutely.
Images that have long been associated with white supremacy were plastered on our wall. And what we found out from a state senator is that for about 6 or 7 years, she has lobbied on the House of the Georgia State Senate floor for legislation against hate crimes to no avail. She said to me, Pastor Long, I heard about your story. She sent her cameraman to take images and look around. She said, what has been done here is wrong. And the individuals that did the heinous act, one of them turned himself in and apologized. But what we found out is that, and let me say this publicly, the Henry County grand jury decided that no charges should be filed against those two individuals that vandalized and desecrated the house of worship, where we now call Seed Planters Church McDonough. Furthermore, not only did the grand jury not do anything, there was to this very day is no legislation on the books for hate crime. Jake, were they racist? I don't know. But is it clear that once you walk into your church and you see satanic images and you see images plastered on your wall that have, when you Google them, they've been longly associated to the Aryan nation, and you see that on the wall, is it fair to say that this is wrong and perhaps this is racist?
I think that, yes.
And this is hate. Sure. This is hate, right? But we don't have any legislation to do anything about it. Thanks be to God that I prayed for one of those young men. He came to our church. We loved on him. What the Lord showed us during that troubling time is that the love of God wins. His dad found out what he did, drug him by the ear, brought him to the church. He apologized. He came and he tried to do his best to scrub it off the wall. It took thousands of dollars of paint and all that kind of great stuff that Atlanta donated, and people across the country. And shameless plug, I'm always eternally grateful, Atlanta, because you displayed the love of God in an unprecedented fashion. Both black churches and white churches and Hispanic churches all pulled together and helped and did all that. But I am still to this day, I'm disappointed, I'm heartbroken that there's no hate crime legislation.
I'm disappointed by a lot of things, I'll be honest with you. And what I think, you and I talked about that quite a bit when your church was vandalized and destroyed. I think that what happened was atrocious. There's no excusing that. It's disgusting. I love what came out of that. I guess I would point more toward what you just mentioned, where love and grace and mercy and kindness won. I remember making the news. I remember seeing you on the news. I remember seeing your church on the news.
Yeah.
I remember the news folks very clearly saying that this church has chosen to love, and this church has chosen to repay evil with good.
Mm-hmm.
And this church has chosen to show. And so I think what happened was awful, but I think what happened was used for amazing, by God in amazing ways.
Absolutely.
As to the law, I can't speak to that. I'm just a simple pastor from McDonough. That's probably over my pay grade again. I just think that God used what happened in your church, and I was moved to tears actually to see how much good came out of the bad. And that's beautiful that we serve a God that does that. That can take racist, disgusting things, spray paint on the walls of a church, and turn that into a moment to show God's amazingness and beauty and splendor and grace. What better? It's the gospel painted out in spray paint, and the response by a church.
Yeah. Jake, listen, we could go on all night long. This is a great conversation, and I really want to continue this. Would you mind to come back and share with us Tuesday night?
Sure, love to.
Great. Well, listen, friends, we're going to go ahead and end our conversation tonight, but I certainly want you to tune in this coming Tuesday. We've got so much more to share, so much more that we want to do our very best to tackle, and so I want you to tune in Tuesday night. Pastor Jake, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Thank you, Pastor Daunta. Good night.
All right. Listen, friends, I hope that you enjoyed tonight's conversation. Again, join us Tuesday night. I need you real quickly, if you have not already done, but like this page, subscribe for those that are on YouTube. We're going to keep this conversation going this coming Tuesday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I want you to be a part of this conversation. Listen, I love you. I appreciate you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you for another edition of Long Talk this Tuesday night. God bless you.
Follow us on Facebook at Daunta A. Long. Follow us on Instagram at Daunta Long. Follow us on YouTube at Daunta A. Long. Thank you for tuning in to Long Talk.
Okay, Brother Jake.
Thank you. You there?
Yes, hold on one second.
Absolutely.